Okay, recording is in progress.
All right, can you see my slides?
Yep, I can see them.
All right. I guess we'll just wait another 4 minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay. Okay, so it's 11:30. We can go ahead and get started. So, good morning, everyone. Today's class is Scouting System Development, and your host is Tejas Shah. He is a talented programmer and one of our most valuable assets on Team 1261. A quick reminder before we get started. Any questions or comments that you have can be directed to the Q&A. I'll be looking in the Q&A and compiling them so at the end of the session, Tejas can answer them if there are any. And I know I don't need to say this, but please keep all questions and comments in accordance to gracious professionalism. All right, you can get started, Tejas.
All right. Hi, everyone. Like Nadia said, my name's Tejas. I'm from FRC Team 1261 from Peach Ridge High School, and today I'll be going over scouting system development, which is basically letting your team know how to build your own personalized scouting solution so you can better develop your own strategy during competition. So first of all, let's talk about what is scouting and why is it important. So in the sporting world, scouts are evaluators from professional teams who kind of travel to college games, and the intent is to pick talented players in order to build the perfect team for themselves. And so these scouts have to consider quantitative and qualitative factors while making decisions that have large ramifications on the performance of their team. And they have a very limited amount of time to analyze this data. And so they also have to rely on a fair bit of intuition and kind of mind games, if you will, in order to not only pick the best team, but also prevent the other teams from assembling their dream team. So in robotics, the primary purpose of scouting is very similar. We try to build alliances that can play in the elimination matches / playoffs. So the main purpose of it is to just pick your 3 teams that will be playing in the playoffs. However, an additional use of it that's very powerful is the ability to actually look at other teams' stats during the qualification matches. So those are those first 80 or 90 matches at the very start of the event. And then you can kind of adapt your team's strategy around all the other teams at the event and really create some unique ways to play the game. So like scouts in the real sporting world, we can collect qualitative / numerical data, and this is often called stand or match scouting. And then we can also collect more textual and qualitative data, and this is often known as pit scouting. So a successful team will culminate both of these kind of data streams into one and utilize this to make every decision regarding strategy during a competition. So in order to gather all of this data and utilize it in a meaningful way, we need to create a system. So in my mind, there are 3 stages to any scouting system. There's collection, storage, and analysis. And so collection will utilize a front-end interface or a form, or it could just be a notepad even. And it's some kind of way for the scouts to manually enter in data or notes or something that you will want to look at later. And then from there, we'll want to find some way to store it in such a way that it's accessible to as many of the teammates who might need it for a variety of uses. And then finally, and the most interesting step in my opinion, is analysis, which is where we have to actually gather insights from the data. We're able to make decisions about alliances and strategies based off of it. And so below each of these bubbles, you can see some of the common tools that are utilized to achieve each of these steps in the sort of pipeline. And these kind of tools are very popular within FRC. So before we walk you through how to program and design and structure your entire own scouting app, you should know that there are many, many available solutions online that actually require little to no work and no programming or coding to pull off. So if you search up on Chief Delphi or just anywhere online, FRC scouting apps, you can find many of the kinds of online scouting systems that your team can just jump right into, and some examples are on the screen. So most of these kinds of applications are created by other teams, and they'll actually provide you with an application that collects data, and it'll store it for you, and it even might have a page that shows you some key statistics and analyses. And then you can also export the data for your own analysis in, say, Tableau or Excel, if you so choose. And so these options are incredibly viable and powerful, so don't feel that you need to tough it out and create your own scouting app and put all that work if it's not in your team's best interests or time. And additionally, paper scouting can be used to easily collect data and organize it within stacks of paper. So basically what it is it's a paper form for each team. So imagine a piece of paper for each team in an event. And it just has like all the notes and all the match data that you can have for that one team at that event. And then you can kind of sift through the different papers and sort them in a kind of stack to figure out which team is better in that kind of way. And so it can be rewarding, but it's also very tedious. And if you don't take the time to actually input that data from the paper into an Excel spreadsheet or any other kind of analysis tool, you can't really do any sort of advanced analysis with it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then again, teams like 254, which are some of the best teams in FRC, do use paper scouting. So I can't say that it won't be effective and useful. So all of this being said, the most flexible and meaning solution will always just be to build your own system that plays to your team's specific needs. So we'll go over how to accomplish that. So let's say you're willing to create your own team application. Now I'll want to talk about how we want to build it. So the easiest way to decide which one of these 3 or 4 options that are presented on the screen, iOS, Android, web application, the easiest way to decide which one to focus on and use is just to figure out how many of those that will be scouts at competition have iPhones or Android. And so if like all of your scouting team has iPhones by some coincidence, then it may be in your best interest to make an iOS app. Same goes for Android. And so this will influence which language you learn and kind of how to build the application. If it's more of a 50-50 split, or if you just want more versatility, you can examine creating a web application. And so a web application, pretty much all devices, be it iOS, Android, Motorola, whatever it is, they can use these sort of web applications because they can access the internet. And so it will require additional tools and languages that you might need to learn, but it's easily the most versatile compared to iOS or Android. And alternatively, there's some frameworks such as Flutter or React Native that exist that can actually let you simultaneously write code for an Android app, an iOS app, and a web application all in one. And so these frameworks will undoubtedly have large learning curves, but it's also a really solid solution if you're looking into that. If your team does have the money, you might actually want to consider buying like 6 old iPads or 6 Android tablets that you can use to bring this competition for scouting. So that way your team can actually know for sure what they're going to be using, and you can build to that whatever you're going to be buying. And regardless of the solution you choose, just make sure it takes into account both your team's programming abilities and also the devices of resources for your team. So you might have heard the term full stack developer before. This just refers to a developer that has experience creating applications from sort of top to bottom with using a single stack of tools that help them each stage of the application. So for example, the 1261 scouting application that I helped to build could be considered full stack application. It just uses HTML, CSS for a front end kind of form, and then it uses MongoDB and Flask, which is a Python library to kind of store and transfer data, and then it uses Python tools in Tableau and also MongoDB Atlas to kind of do some of the analysis. So listed on the slide, there are multiple options for things that you can use, and these are more geared towards the web application option from the previous side. However, I do know that MongoDB can also be used for iOS and Android applications, so there's a bit of play with that. So a personal recommendation would actually be to learn the MERN stack. So this stands for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. And so these are kind of 4 frameworks or tools that kind of go really well together, and there's plenty of tutorials online for that specific stack. So mastering this one will also probably get you plenty of job offers down the road because it's an incredibly strong way of building web applications. So now let's go into each stage and kind of analyze our thoughts about how to accomplish each one in the most effective way. So start with stage one, which is collection. So as mentioned before, we have two kind of streams of data that we need to be collecting. So many beginning applications might choose to only focus on the stand scouting aspect, and then they'll leave the pit scouting aspect for kind of like a Google Doc or a Notepad or something that isn't necessarily an application per se. And this can actually work really well. And so this is merely a suggestion on the slide of how to structure the human aspect of your data collection. So this is how to divvy up the roles between team members. So pit scouts are people who are more outspoken, more introverted. They like to talk to people. And stand scouts are those who may not have the people skills, but they still want to make an impact on the team's success. So more than likely, in addition, you'll also want a super scout. And this will probably end up being whoever programs the scouting application, which is me on my team. And this person will kind of oversee the scouting process. And so they'll assign which robot in each match to go to people, and they'll fix up any problems with the application as it occurs. And so this basically means that you'll have 7 people in the stands at all times. And you can kind of create like a schedule that you give the scouts breaks and whatnot to make sure that no one is like scouting for like 6 hours in a row or something ridiculous. And then pit scouts, they're usually more autonomous. Their teams are 2 to 3, and they'll just bounce around the teams in the pits. They'll find interesting observations that might want to factor into certain strategy or alliance decisions. And so you can collect this qualitative data using an application or just a Notepad, Google Doc, whatever. So here's a suggestion about how to actually organize your scouting application. So the 4 pages at the top, the ABCD, those are kind of, in my mind, the must-have, in my opinion. So you'll want to make sure that every scouting solution that you use has those 4 abilities. And then the 3 at the bottom, the ABC at the bottom, those are kind of nice to have. So they'll make your mentors appreciate your skills a bit more, and they'll also definitely aid in your ability to affect all the decisions that might be made at a competition. So allowing the entire team to view all of the data will be really important because it can actually allow the pit scouts to have more fluid conversation with the pits. It can allow the drive team to know what their alliance's strengths are and what their opposing alliance's weaknesses are, so they can actually build a strategy that will help them win that match specifically. So it's in your best interest to kind of make the entire application as a whole really easy to navigate and use for the entire team. And then you also want to make the data easy to download just for yourself so you can load it into whatever analysis software, and you can easily find those numerical insights. So here's some pictures of how 1261 structures their scouting app. It doesn't look that pretty, I'm not going to lie, but it does get the job done. So you can see how it's very easy to follow the stand scouting page. It follows the kind of order of the scouting process, and you can see how team data search function and also the kind of rankings and metrics page, those can be used in pit scouting conversations, and it might aid in the discussions that they might have, so you can actually talk to the team and say, hey, I saw that you guys had a really good autonomous that last round. Let's talk more about that. Develop a strategy, get to know that team, and hopefully maybe even get an alliance. So when it comes to which data points to actually collect, the key is really quality over quantity. So you'll want to make sure to ask the scouts to collect things that are realistically able to be counted and kept track of. And so the easier the metric is to collect, the more accurate the data will be, especially since scouting is known as a grueling task. So the easier it is, the more the scouts will love you. So stand scouting data should follow the natural progression of a match. So you should have kind of autonomous at the top, and then it'll go to teleop scoring, then end game. So it's really easy for the scout to just scroll down and mark in the numbers. And then the pit scouting fields should actually follow the natural flow of a pit scouting conversation. So a really good way to build a pit scouting form, which is kind of the form that the pit scout will be writing down or taking notes on as they have their pit scout conversations. A really good way to kind of build that form to actually imitate a pit scouting encounter prior to competition, and then kind of write down some of the most important things that naturally come up during that conversation and turn those into data points. This might be things like how experienced is the driver or how fast can the bot climb. It really depends on your own team when figuring out what kind of pit scouting data you want to collect. So external data sources are also pretty useful in the scouting process. And they can give you information that no scouts or no stand scout or no pit scout will be able to give you. So they're really important statistics to kind of keep track of as an FRC data analyst. So you'll have OPR, DPR, CCWM. I can talk a bit more about these statistics later if you want. But basically, they give you insights into kind of the offensive and defensive power of the teams. And the really nice thing is that you can actually plug and play them directly into your analysis tool or your storage tool, because they have web APIs that you can kind of request the data from the Blue Alliance or statbotics.io servers, and it can just plop it straight into your database. So it's super easy to work with. Now let's move on to the storage component of scouting. So this kind of deals with trying to make your data as versatile and as ready for the analysis portion as possible. So the most important debate in regards to data storage is kind of SQL, which is a way of formatting, versus JSON, which is another way of formatting. Now, I'm not a professional database engineer by any means, so take what I say, especially on this slide, with a grain of salt. However, I have found through my own experience that for beginners, it's usually easier to use a JSON storage system than it is in a SQL storage system, just because of the kind of learning curve with SQL. However, to ignore the power and versatility of SQL or SQL, however you want to call it, is to discredit kind of set theory itself. So I will just say that it'll be usually harder to jump into SQL, but it may be worthwhile for your team. Now, seen to the right here is an example of 1261's JSON storage system, which is created in a service that I've talked about. It's called MongoDB, and it's a highly recommended service, database service that I would recommend for all the teams in FRC. So you can kind of see how there's an array of all the matches that are stored underneath a team. And then each match object kind of has like the match, the autonomous, and all the statistics. And so you can kind of organize it in such a way that each team in the database then has a list of matches inside of it. And so from what I've been able to figure out, it's a really nice way of organizing the data inside of the database. And so, and you can see at the bottom that there are averages. So there's low average, high average, and these averages can be continuously calculated. And so it's a really easy way to do some rudimentary kind of low-level analysis without even the need for an external analysis software. It's literally just an average. And so yeah, transferring data is very important to make sure you can actually analyze it in the end. So let's say you've stored all the data in your database, great, but now you want to make sure that you can actually get it to wherever you're going to be analyzing it. So before you transfer the data, you'll want to make sure that it's kept in a consistent file type, and that this kind of file type that you use plays nicely with the analysis tool that you'll be using. So a really good data format is a CSV. There's also text files, JSON documents. There's plenty of different ways to do that. Just make sure that it plays with the analysis tool that you want to use. So when you're deciding what kind of data transfer your scouting system wants to use, or you want to use, you be conscious of both the speed and the reliability. So there are kind of 4 standard ways, and that's USB, over the internet, QR code, and Bluetooth. So USB data transfer is the most reliable. If your scouting app has any form of file, it can be transferred via USB. However, this does require you to kind of shuffle around all the devices and make sure that the one USB drive that has the master scouting database is always up to date. And so this can kind of reduce efficiency. So another option would be QR codes. This is an option that I've seen a lot of teams use recently. So you can actually just create a QR code that stores all the data for a given match or whatnot, and then you can kind of scan it onto the webcam of the master analysis computer, and then you can do it that way. It also requires your team to kind of pass around devices often, but it's definitely a very viable option. Another method is Bluetooth or wireless transfer. So Bluetooth, if you're using this, you want to have kind of a constant stream of transfer, kind of like on a match-by-match basis. So you say, everybody, all right, collect your data, and then we'll Bluetooth it over to my computer right before the next match, and we'll do that every match. So this is kind of a nice way to transfer the data. You'll just want to make sure that all your devices are Bluetooth enabled, and you'll be good to go. And then the final, most reliable method, but also the most time-consuming to develop, is just uploading it to a cloud or web server. So for this, you'll want to make sure that all of your scouting devices are mobile data enabled, and you'll want to make sure that since the hotspots are banned at FRC competitions, you'll want to make sure that you have good cell service in that venue. So, and then you'll also want to make sure that the scouting app has that online web cloud storage database connected to it. That way it can just have a stream of data. It's a very good option. It's the easiest option in competition to kind of work around with, because the scouts can just press submit and you know that it's going to go there, assuming they have data. But you'll want to have a backup option in case there isn't good cell phone service in your venue. All right, so now we'll talk about the culmination of all the data. This is the analysis, where we turn the data into meaningful steps towards success and strategy. So after you export and transfer the data to the main device that will be analyzing the data, you can perform visual analysis. This can be used to kind of easily spot anomalies, inconsistencies within the data. So by far the most popular data analysis tool for FRC, no questions asked, is Tableau. I believe that they actually give you like a free trial of Tableau, or like a pro version in the kit of parts. I'm not sure, but there are many other alternatives that exist. But these kind of visual analysis tools allow you to import data, and then you can create graphs, tables. You can kind of weigh factors between teams, and it's a really easy way to kind of just figure out really quickly at an eye's glance who's who at an event. So it's an efficient way of verifying who's the best in a certain category, or who's the most consistent with a certain type of scoring. However, I would not recommend basing key decisions entirely off of these graphs, because they won't tell the whole story. They'll just show you what your eye can really pick up. So in order to kind of get a holistic view of the data, you'll want to conduct some numerical analysis. So here we'll talk about pivot tables and weighted algorithms. So in 1261, the scouting application that I helped build, it actually has some cred within the team for its ability to kind of predict outcomes. And all of the power that goes into this prediction relies on the idea of weighted algorithms. So basically, this is the idea of assigning weights or values to compare the relative importance of a data field in your team's strategy. So it'll allow you to get a numerical value showcasing the strength of a team based on a multitude of factors. And it's an extremely effective way to kind of take into account all the factors of competition and condense it down to one number. So it's a really good option if the learning curve for Tableau seems too steep, or if you just want a simpler numerical approach. And you can kind of change the weights on the fly in order to meet the ever-changing requirements of your team as it moves closer to alliance selection. So say, as you guys progress through the event, your high goal shooting is really on point. So you know that you might want to actually start looking at a low goal box, right? You can kind of adjust the low goal weight so that teams who are better at low goal can kind of sift up onto the top of your list, and then you'll be able to take note of them better. And this process will feed directly into your pick list creation process. So this is the main purpose of analysis. And ideally, it will utilize every single piece of data that you've collected for the entire event. So when creating your pick list, you'll want to, or this is just a way to do it, you'll want to create such a list that first you use your weighted algorithm that encompasses all the kinds of teams that your team would like to have, right? So ideally, you'll have tuned the weights over the course of the competition, so you know, okay, we want high goal shooting, we really want climbing, we don't care about color wheels so much, right? You can kind of set the bars for what you want to look for. You can compile that into your weighted algorithm. That algorithm can spit out kind of a list of teams ranked in that way. And then from there, you can utilize the qualitative pit scouting data and other insights that you might have gotten from your visual analysis, so your Tableau, in order to swap around teams on that weighted list. So imagine if you have an Excel, your list in Excel, you can kind of just take out this team, place them right here, and so forth and so on, based on some of the pit scouting data that you and some other pit scouts can sift through, say, a couple of matches right before alliance selection. And then you'll want to create like a go, no-go decision for every kind of possibility that might happen. So for all the teams that are ranked above you, you'll want to say, okay, if this team picks us, we'll say yes. If this team picks us, we'll say no. And then for all the teams ranked below you, you'll want to say, okay, we should pick, these are first choice, these are second choice, and so on and so forth. And if you create that kind of tree of decisions, line selection should be a breeze, because you'll just be able to stick to that list and cross out teams as you go. However, it is important to keep in mind overall team chemistry. So don't kind of go data crazy and just solely rely on your pick list with no kind of regard for chemistry or strategy. So you want to talk to your drive team and other people, other pit scouts, and really get to know the team's chemistry, and also just consider, for example, if your team needs 2 climbers, like for infinite recharge, in order to win finals, you'll want to have at least 2 climbers so you can get that bar level or get the 3-point climb. And so if you know that your team cannot climb, then you'll want to make sure that you pick a climber, even if your pick list that was weighted by your algorithm might say otherwise, right? So make sure to just account for that. All right, so I know I've talked about this again, but a well-created scouting system offers nothing if the insights that it gives are not broadcasted throughout the whole team. So mentors, scouts, drive teams, everyone should be in the loop kind of as much as possible about team's current standing on major decisions. Now, it's okay to kind of keep the more sensitive decisions in kind of like a tight circle or a tight group, just to avoid them kind of getting out, and so that people on other teams kind of know your strategy. However, the main things such as like the drive team's core strategy or your team's robot's role on a alliance, those kinds of things that um, every person on the team should want to know, you'll want to make it easily accessible. So this can be done through your application, right? So you can say, all right, I'm going to make this application and I'm going to make that ranking metrics page. And I'm going to make sure that all my scouts, all the people that might be talking to other teams, they need to check that and they need to know all the stuff so that they're well prepared for a conversation. Because a conversation between your team member and any other team can happen at any time during the competition. And you'll want to make sure that that team member can give straight answers rather than say conflicting things, because that'll just make your team look better as a unit because you have one solid goal and you guys know where you want to be. And it'll make your team worth working with, and it'll also make your team look like a terror to be competing against. So just remember that scouting is a human process. So make sure to keep everybody in the scouting decision process. Double check the algorithms work, and you should be good to go. So now these are just some general tips that as scouting lead for 1261 I've kind of figured out over my experience. So keep these in mind, and they might just help you big time in securing that blue banner. So firstly, a little tip for alliance selections. If you look at a team's late game performance and you see that they kind of like spiked up from their early performance, you might want to take note of that, because this might mean that they have fixed some issue of their robots that was plaguing them over the course of the competition, and they're now actually stronger than before, even if they necessarily didn't show it. And you can actually factor this into your weighted algorithms by collecting the qualification match number and making higher match numbers have a greater effect on the overall score of your team. So for example, if you collect data on a team on match number 3, you'll want that data to affect your algorithm less than match 83's data. Next tip would be to, if you know that you want to ally with the team strongly, just go ahead and send some pit scouts to talk to them. Talk to that team's higher ups, the drive team, mentors, scouting leads, before alliance selection. And just have a conversation. Will you guys pick us? Are we in your consideration? Would you guys be down if we were to pick you? Right? And that can really help clear up some of the mystery that might happen on the alliance selection field. And so one more obvious tip, in my opinion, just to make sure everybody knows this, don't ever look at the board and decide who you're going to pick based on the standings. So if you're on the alliance selection, don't just look at, you could call it the blue alliance ranking. Don't just look at the blue alliance rankings and say, okay, oh, these guys are ranked number 4 and we're ranked number 3. We'll just go ahead and pick them, right? Always make sure you do at least a little bit of your own analysis, because you'll never know why, because a team standing can actually mean close to nothing by its actual strength or performance. So you shouldn't ever base your decision solely off of this. Another more strategic tip that might play into scouting is when deciding who to pick, think about overall team composition. So it'll be tempting to kind of pick like 3 high shooting bots so that you can kind of pummel in those 3-pointers and get as many points as possible. But this might create a bottleneck in like the control panel area of the field, because if all 3 bots are needing to go in that control panel and shoot from that specific region, they'll all be stepping on each other's toes, and then the net result will be that the scoring potential is actually decreased. So instead, you might want to opt for 2 high-scoring bots and a defense bot. So just make sure to keep those kinds of team compositions in mind when picking teams. And then another cool tip that 1261 has had success with in the past is actually trading scouting data with other teams, so that you can verify your own team data. So we might go up to, say team 1683, and we might be like, hey, we have an Excel document of all of our data from day one of Gainesville. We'll give you it, and you guys give us your data. And this way you can verify the data. And it's also a really nice way to kind of slide in with a strong team that you might want to ally with and really develop a relationship so that you can rely on that relationship during alliance selection. Relationships will not win you a great alliance, but it certainly can make your team more comfortable with the team that you want to ally with, and it'll put you in a better standing. And then finally, one of my personal favorite tips is before the competition even begins, gather some information about the teams beforehand. So this is called pre-scouting. So just do some research, do some stalking online, figure out, okay, look at some robot reveals, just figure out, get a feel for the teams that you might be going up against at an event before the event even starts. So especially if you're going to an event in another state or with teams that you might not have had a relationship with before or at Worlds even, it might be really important to kind of assimilate into the environment and easily recognize how your team kind of stacks up against the competition. And it'll make it really easy to kind of figure out where your team is, and it'll also make pit scouting decisions, pit scouting conversations, all that kind of stuff much easier. So with that, thank you guys. Good luck. And my contact info is right here, tejas.s@phsrobotics.com. If you have any questions, email me. And I think we can field some Q&As now. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the Q&A chat.
Okay, so as of right now, we don't have anything in the chat, but we can give it maybe 2 minutes or so if anybody has any questions.
Okay.
Okay, we have one right now. How will pit or stand scouting work with COVID regulations?
Ooh, okay. So yeah, I was actually just talking to my mentor. He's in the mentor and coaching meeting. I'm not sure how sensitive the information is, but basically competitions will be limited this year due to COVID regulations, obviously, so there'll be less people available as scouts. So an idea could be to just have the teams watch the Twitch live stream and do scouting that way. Another idea might be to just flat out reduce the amount of scouting required. So say instead of scouting every match, you scout like 2 matches per team. That's something we've done at Worlds before. Just like every team, just get 2 match scouting data, get 2 sets of data per match in the system and kind of just analyze it that way. But yeah, it'll definitely be tough for sure. Pit scouting especially will be tough because I'm not sure what the regulations on talking to other teams will be. So I guess it'll be much better for those external data sources that Blue Alliance and Stoutbotics.io that I was talking about. That might actually be very nice to rely on, especially in these COVID days.
All right, that's all we have right now. So do you want to give the Q&A a couple more minutes, or do you want to go ahead and end the session now?
We can give it a couple more minutes and then we'll go ahead and end it.
All right.
I know we don't have too many people in the session.
Yeah, we have about 11.
Is SQL better for organization or JSON? So, like I said, kind of SQL and JSON, they're both very well utilized in the database professional world for a variety of uses. At Pure HS Robotics specifically, we have found that JSON storage through MongoDB, which is the specific service that we use, works really nicely. However, I know of other scouting applications that successfully use SQL, so it's really not so much an argument of organization so much as it is kind of the learning curve, I would say. Okay, what are the pros and cons of Tableau? So Tableau is pretty powerful. You can get a lot of the visual analysis, the graphs. I know you can do some kind of pivot table stuff. Not, it doesn't give you the kind of control over the data that you might have if you just did like flat out Excel or just flat out calculations. Tableau is really more for just like finding out kind of like anomalies. So if you see like so if you kind of have a graph and you see like one team has a huge spike in a certain scoring area, that's kind of the really use of it, just seeing like that one thing to focus on. Thank you, Daniel Park, for the informative session. Or thank you for enjoying the informative session. Would making a custom scouting app be worth it in your opinion? Or is booking one more worth it? Or, I would say if you is stealing one more worth it. If you have the manpower or the knowledge to make one, it gives you agency over your data. However, if your team is less resourced, less knowledgeable in the programming, the kind of here, I'll go to that slide. The options that I listed on that slide, they're very powerful. So it's definitely a good alternative. Are there any cons to using MERN? I know it's all JavaScript, basically. If you want to use MERN, you're going to have to learn JavaScript. So I'm not a big fan of JavaScript in my opinion, so that's a con to me. But if you're knowledgeable in it, I would say it's definitely one of the most powerful ways to build a web application. 1261 utilizes a Python-based service. It's called Flask. And so I just did that because I myself am very proficient in Python. And I also wanted to utilize some of the data analysis tools that are specific to Python, such as sklearn and stuff like that, or NumPy. So for that reason, I chose Python, but MERN is definitely a great alternative. All right, it looks like the Q&A is pretty done, so if you want to go ahead and end the session, I think we should be good for that. Any last minute questions?
All right, well, I'll stop recording now.
Okay.